Well, good afternoon, everyone here on the East Coast, and good morning to those on the West Coast. I'm Tamara Ecker, Executive Director of British American Business here in New York. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session on client engagement and customer communications. This is the second in our Resilience and Continuity series for the small and mid-market segment of our membership. We'll be running the third session in the series on internal staff engagement on Thursday, April 28th at 11 a.m. So please do mark your calendars for that. At BAB, we've been running about 2 webinars per week, a mix of programming between practical advice on how to navigate the crisis and big picture views of the economic and business environment. So please keep an eye out on our website and on your emails for updates. So it's great to have you all with us, and it's a privilege for me to introduce you to our facilitator today, Mary Lee Sachs. Mary Lee is co-founder and US CEO for the London-based independent brand consultancy, Brand Pie. Mary Lee has over 25 years of experience in marketing communications. And although she's now based in New York, she's spent a significant amount of time in Europe leading international assignments for blue chip companies such as American Express, P&G, and PepsiCo. So with that, Mary Lee, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Tamara. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start with a few housekeeping rules. For those of you listening in, you are in listen-only mode. And there is a chat, there's a chat function and there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. We ask that if you have questions, you use the Q&A function. The chat function won't operate. So the best way of getting questions into us is through the Q&A function. The breakdown of today's program will be about 40 to 45 minutes. Well, we've got some questions for the 2 Michaels, who I'll introduce in a second. And then really kind of opening up the floor to other questions that you might have out in the audience. We will monitor and answer the questions through the webinar. Apologies now if we don't get to everybody's questions, but if we don't, the British American Business team will follow up post-webinar. And the session is being recorded and can be shared on request, so you just need to let people know if you'd like to get that after the fact. So I'd like to welcome our 2 Michaels. This is going to be very confusing this afternoon, but I'm going to differentiate them by Michael T and Michael G. Michael T is Michael Thompson. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Theodo. He moved to New York from the London office of Theodo to help lead the expansion of the company in North America. Founded a decade ago in Paris, Theodo's team specialized in digital transformation and product delivery, counting brands like LVMH and McKinsey amongst their clients, as well as exciting startups and others. Theodo works directly with product, engineering, and marketing teams to release innovative solutions rapidly. Our other Michael is Michael G, Michael Gordon, who is the Principal and Chief Executive of Group Gordon. Throughout his career, Michael has worked with leaders in business, politics, and philanthropy. He founded the award-winning communications firm Group Gordon, seeing a need in the market for a firm that excelled both strategically and tactically. His firm navigates challenging situations from complex communications matters for influential corporations, financial institutions, professional service firms, and nonprofits. Very broad group of client portfolio. Group Gordon, which has offices in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, was named one of the top 100 best places to work in New York City by Crain's. And Provoke has honored Group Gordon at its Sabre Awards as one of the top 5 corporate agencies in North America, as well as the best agency to work for. So well done, Michael G. Michael's insights on communications and political matters have been featured in leading broadcast and print outlets, including CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, USA Today, The Guardian, and the list goes on. Before beginning his career in corporate PR, Michael served in the Clinton administration as spokesperson for Attorney General Janet Reno. A former attorney with Skadden Arps, Michael earned a JD and an MBA degrees from Columbia University and his BA from the University of Pennsylvania. So those are our 2 Michaels, Michael T and Michael G. So I'm going to kick off the questions with a very kind of broad question to begin with, which really is directed to both of them. If I can just bring up my questions, that would be really good. So the COVID-19 crisis has been unprecedented in our modern world. Those of us who've been around a while have seen a lot of different situations, but this really is one that kind of doesn't compare to anything else. In this challenging time, when it feels so much harder to reach and connect with customers and clients, how can companies adapt their communication strategy to best respond? And how should companies repivot their communications to provide value during this critical crisis time? I'll kick off with Michael G. You have to unmute yourself, Michael. Michael, can you unmute?
Okay, there, got it. I think you have to unmute first or something. Anyway, hi, thank you, Mary Lee, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So two things that come to mind when I think about the current crisis that we're all living through. The first is communicating with emotional intelligence, and that's always important, of course, but I think it's at a new premium right now because people are going through such a hard time personally. They may have family members affected. They may have family members on the front line trying to deal with this and help out. And so I think emotional intelligence is at a premium in general. And the other issue is flexibility, because as always in any kind of business, you need to be nimble, you need to be flexible, but you have to take it to a new level. On the emotional intelligence front, I'll say, so all of you read about the Shake Shack news this week. So Shake Shack has been a client of ours for 8 years. We were working with them all weekend on this, planning for advising them on both the business and their communications on this. And their brand is an emotionally intelligent brand in terms of the way they manage their employees, the way they deal with their customers, and it fits squarely into their brand to return that money. And I thought that was very smart. And flexibility, obviously, they thought they were in line. I think one of the things the government has tried to do is be generous so that it makes it easy for a range of businesses to support their employees. The goal is to support employees, but of course you have to be flexible. And it became clear pretty quickly to Shake Shack, and of course you saw yesterday with Harvard, that certain institutions should not be doing it. And so you have to be nimble and respond accordingly.
Michael T., anything to add from the digital perspective?
Oh, absolutely. I very much agree with what you said. I think it's very challenging to approach things with emotional intelligence and to try and attract new business without sounding coarse or inappropriate. But we have been really impressed with the quality of digital conferences and the like, which has allowed us access to attendee lists, and we can make really good communication with those attendees in these situations. It's about approaching them more in terms of looking for advice and opening a communication and trying to sell them something straight away. They understand their industry and the challenges they're facing way better than I ever will. And people are more than willing to give their time as well. That's been something that I've been surprised by and really delighted by in the current situation. One other aspect I'd touch upon is communication channels. And for us, we're really leveraging our experts to build community. So different companies' resources may be different than they looked a few months ago, and people might be less busy in certain areas of the business and more busy in others. But for us, we always support our engineers to making sure they give back to the tech communities they're part of. So they're creating podcasts and blogs and technical guides. It's a very educated community, and us giving back and enabling our team to really be a voice for the company rather than having to channel it through a marketing department per se has been really effective.
Great, thank you. So now that we're all remote, which is in itself different and difficult, and everything and everyone has gone digital. Everybody's using Zoom and all the other kind of tools that are out there. So now that the digital space is more saturated, what are the best strategy to differentiate your communications and your company's message in this time of crisis when everybody's using the same channels? And how do you keep your brand resilient and relevant during this time when everything is changing? I'm going to go to Michael T. first because he's got the digital perspective.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very good point. I think it is a saturated market right now. I think in terms of differentiating, it's really about making sure your message is meaningful and sincere. And if your company is doing something that is genuinely benefiting those in the random, whether that's specifically a company like Pret, giving 50% off to healthcare workers, or even just Slack removing some paywalls and giving premium features, then obviously that's something to communicate about. I definitely feel there can be a overabundance of communication, but making sure it's relevant, it has an impact, and it's meaningful to the people you're communicating to is obviously really critical. I'd also say, just in terms of one thing to differentiate is sort of focusing on cost signaling. So it's really hard to show a serious message in an email for people to take that seriously. The cost of delivery is little to nothing. There can be impersonal. So I think personalization is more critical than ever. And even going to the extent of, handwriting some messages to your core customers, your core clients, if you have their home address, of course, it's going to have a way bigger impact than sending a generic COVID response message to your mailing list of 40,000 people, I think.
So Michael T., I was reading earlier today about the digital and organizations moving to creating nerve centers for their organizations, because obviously everything is coming back to the communication lines being open. And I know from my own experience of having tried to get food delivery from everybody that I've tried, it's quite difficult and challenging given that the delivery slots are taken up, and then you get frustrated and you get annoyed because you can't reach anybody. What's your experience in the sort of the advent of digital nerve centers?
Well, I think you were touching on a really important point of sustainability, and actually, you don't want your communications team building a buzz about something that you can't then deliver on. So nerve centers or improving infrastructure, making sure that services are reliable and open to people. Maybe using this as an opportunity to look at your modernizing some aspects of your technology to reduce costs. You can reduce your environmental impact. You can improve reliability. These are all core things you can do that your communication team needs to be looped in on. They need to understand these efforts that the engineering team are going through, so that they know when they can push new products and services to the market.
Thank you. So I'm going to direct this one to Michael G. Everybody's communicating, they're trying to communicate. If they can't communicate, that's an issue. But how much communications is too much communications, or is there such a thing right now?
Yeah, I think quality is at a premium right now, and that even speaks a little bit to the previous issue in that a way to stand out is the substance of your communications. And you have to ask yourself, is your voice relevant to a particular conversation? Do you have something truly meaningful to add to the conversation? And so I would say, as a rule, by and large, but there are exceptions, I think you do want to over communicate. I think now you have to communicate strategically and well, you always want to communicate strategically, but I should say communicate surgically. And really with substance, because people's patience is much shorter than it is normally. And to Michael's point, the way you communicate is so important. I'm going to just take a second, if you don't mind, Mary Lee, and read an email I got yesterday that I thought was so smart. And as we all are, we're getting 1 million of these. And I got one of these yesterday. And I'll just read you the first 2 or 3 sentences, just because I thought it was so, it really brought me into the rest of the conversation so much more well than most of these, which have that 1 sentence throwaway, hope you're doing okay. But this one really sounded like it invested. It said, while we know we may not be the first thing on your mind as you navigate the effects of COVID-19 on your day-to-day lives, we still want to reach out and connect you and keep you updated on things here. We've heard from many who are themselves or who have loved ones on the front lines of the pandemic, and we are all incredibly grateful to them and the many others who are seeing us through the crisis at great risk to themselves. And then they went in to talk about what was directly relevant. But that, of the dozens of communications I've received, that was far and away the smartest because it really brought me in. It was sincere. It was sincere. It was heartfelt. And I think that's very important right now.
So a question we've just had come in from the Q&A, which I think is a really interesting point, is the return of the phone and rise of video a temporary phenomenon because it feels so much more effective than email has been? Or do we think we'll go back to business as usual when this is all over with?
So, I'm sorry, were you asking
I'm asking for both of you, but go jump in, Michael.
Yeah, so I think over time there will be a gradual return to the norm. I think, and I think in many aspects of what we're experiencing, there will be a gradual return. In part because, many people have more time right now. Not everyone, but many people do. And so it's easier to engage them on the phone. And I agree, it's more substantive. But I do, and I think it's a great question, but I do think we should take advantage of that as long as we can, because you can have more real conversations and try to hold on to the crescendo as long as you can as it starts to, as that curve starts to flatten. But it'll be a while, before that communications curve sort of flattens along with everything else. But let's take advantage of it as much as we can.
Michael T, do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. I think, people will change their habits. We don't know which habits are going to stick. I think we're seeing some meetings that have changed to emails and some emails that have changed to meetings, and people are really thinking more critically about their time and how they're communicating with others. I think Michael's point on, a phone call is always going to be more meaningful than an email. And I ask myself that question constantly: could this be done in a phone call rather than an email? It's something I've always got on my mind, and now more than
Right.
Mary Lee, I'll just say to the point of people having more time very quickly, I emailed a Times reporter this morning and she got back to me in 1 second, okay, which never happens with her or with anybody, as you well know. And certainly, I mean, journalists, reporters are very busy right now, but clearly they also have more time because either they're not commuting, because they're stuck at home, so they're not doing other things. So it was shocking to me how quickly she got back. And, I think it's great for the relationship. And as I said, use that as a positive as much as we can.
So I'm going to get more into sort of strategically where we go next, but I want to pick up one of the questions that we got from our audience. Since you talk about journalists specifically, what's the role of the traditional media or journalist with regard to trade show events, transitioning to digital or virtual conferences? What's happening? I mean, Michael G, what do you see happening with journalists in that scenario? Yeah,
I fully expect, assuming the particularly trade publications stay in business, I fully expect them to cover the trade shows virtually. And so we have clients who have moved, changed their conferences and what have you. We haven't, they haven't taken place yet, and we're planning for them. But our plan is the same substantively, but procedurally it's different because everything is virtual. But I fully expect, we've seen a lot of contraction in the news business. All of you know that since 2008, and it's continued steadily, even despite a long recovery. And it's going to start again. And so we want those smaller publications, the local publications, the trade publications to survive, and hopefully will. So that would be the only barrier that I see.
Okay, great. Thank you. So everybody's talking about how long is this going to go on? What are we going to do? Do we have a plan? As conditions change seemingly weekly, and there's so much uncertainty about when the economy is going to reopen, how do you balance developing your longer term marketing strategies for when we exit this crisis, whenever that may be, and creating more timely, current, and relative and sensitive content? I'll ask Michael T that question first, but I want to also come to you, Michael G.
Absolutely. I'll talk, my perspective is always from a new product development and then the communication that has to align with that. So I think that's really critical is not to panic and completely change all of your thoughts that you had before. It's sticking to your core of what you know and your core customers and core products. So whether that's winding down marketing efforts and development efforts on less critical products and focusing on the core, that's one aspect, I should say. And I think it's focusing on strategies that benefit both the now and the long term. Focus on your, as I say, your value proposition, what's your core product, double down on those efforts. I think that's really the core. Just not drifting too far away from what you've previously done, focusing on a smaller subset of your feature and product development, and ultimately try and find stuff that's going to both benefit the short and the long term. So what I mentioned earlier about leveraging your experts and digitizing of physical products is very well understood, and Amazon and people are getting way more packages than they ever used to. But digitizing physical services as well as this physical products is something that could benefit the long term and the short term. So I gave that example of our engineers creating content, but more concretely to drive revenue for now, I ran across the story of a Chinese cosmetics company that obviously was forced to close all its stores. Its sales plummeted by 90%, and they redeployed its beauty advisors, essentially as influencers, leveraging tools like WeChat. And so it's very quick, very cheap. It's very achievable for almost every company. But you leverage these experts and these people passionate about your product and services. And the outcome of that for them was one advisor managed to outperform 4 retail stores in the space of 2 hours. So that's not going to happen for every company. It's just an example of how you could do this, but it's a communication and product strategy decision that works now and could work in the future.
Right. Michael G., what's your view?
So I think that I'll just first underscore all those points. I think they're all good points. I'll say what we've seen with our clients are 2 things. One, you do want to continue planning for the long term, and as we've said, be flexible. And the timeline will invariably change. I mean, in plans we've made with our clients, we've seen the timeline change just in the 6 or so weeks we've all been holed up. But the other thing you want to do, so as Mary Lee said, our firm happens to have like just a diverse group of clients. We found that every single one has something to say on this subject. And so what you want to do is plan for each phase and for different things, because it's changing daily. And there's both a health and an economic aspect to this. So, and we know the kinds of issues and stories that are upon us, and what's going to happen. So you need to plan for different variables in the story, but you also need to plan for change. And so I think if you're so broadly speaking, what I would recommend is you do planning on 2 tracks: planning along the lines of the virus and the various aspects of it, and then doing your traditional long-term planning and layering over that flexibility.
Thanks. A related question to the kind of forward thinking. Given the level of uncertainty and the closing up of so many sectors and industries, the impact of the pandemic on the economy is going to undoubtedly change consumer behavior. Given this change, what factors should comms execs or PR execs consider to help understand clients' expectations going forward? In other words, how consumers will behave after we emerge from this. I can tell you from my perspective, I have a lot of brand loyalty to certain brands, but I can't get those brands. So I'm trialing new brands for the first time I would never consider using. For example, store brands. What's going to change for marketers as they start thinking about how they come out of this? I'm going to go to Michael G. first.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to the, it's a couple of things. First, you want to understand, first of all, I just want to say, I'm an optimist generally on all of this. So there's a lot of discussion, and a lot of the lead in the stories is driven by and focused on worst case scenarios. So yes, consumer habits are going to change, and we've seen that change, and it's going to have an impact for a long time. But big picture, long term, if you're a consumer brand that has a strong value proposition and can make it through, I think you will go back to the norm. So having said that, I think you want to look at a couple of things. One, what about your audience has changed, and how do you need to change with them? What about your value to them has changed, and how do you need to change with that? I think something we're seeing already is, what can you learn from your peers? What have they done well? What have they done poorly? If they've done something well, take a look at that. And if they've done something poorly, how would you do it better? And although this wasn't directly in the question, I'll just say, and I know we're going to talk about this more later, but make sure all of your internal audiences are sufficiently studied so that they can be on the front lines and represent you well as this narrative continues to change.
Sorry, Michael T, anything to add?
Sure. Really good points there. I think it's just about the tightening of feedback loops. So, you know, now more than ever, your assumptions and your past performance and data is less meaningful than it ever has been. So giving ample opportunity for your customers and clients to provide feedback and update you on how this is affecting them and what change of the support or service they would like from you. And then really focusing on data, you know, making sure that you have everything set up so that as the situation continues to progress, you'll have relevant and insightful data about your consumers and how they are interacting with your product now. How is that, as Michael says, how is that different from what it has been, and what are the trends going? And we don't know which of those are going to stick in the long term. We can make some assumptions, but again, if you shorten these feedback loops, then you can adapt as the situation continues to change.
Great, thanks. Michael G referenced this in his answer about the internal audiences. We are going to talk about them. And we also have one of our questions from our Q&A on this. If we switch gears and think about internal communications, how do you best communicate with your people internally through all of this uncertainty? What becomes important or maybe changes in the scheme of things as far as that goes? Michael G? Yeah,
so internal communications has never been in my career more important than it is right now. Your employees are looking to you for guidance and emotional support, and you shouldn't underestimate that. If you're not already doing this, most of our clients have significantly increased, so whatever they had internally, whether they had a weekly check-in, a monthly check-in, some combinations of different check-ins, they've increased it. They're doing it all on video. And that, you know, and the larger clients are doing it, you know, obviously different departments are doing that. But it's so important because that video is something that you would normally do via even conference call, let's say, if you have multiple offices, you want to do via video as much as possible to add that high touch effect. I also think that if you're a smaller company, you should call every single employee, everyone, ask how they're doing, ask how their family members are doing, and don't talk about work unless they want to talk about work. Just show that you care about them. And, you know, you will get so much goodwill as a result of that. And if you're a larger company, have your managers do that as appropriate by department size. The other thing is, you know, you always want to be honest with your employees. I know that's an obvious point. I think some people instinctually are more comfortable with that than others. But you want to be as open and transparent as possible with your employees. So if you're going for a PPP loan, keep them updated throughout the process about how that's going, what you think the prospects are, what are the potential concerns you have about getting that loan. How does that impact them, whether you get the loan or whether you don't get the loan? Should you, are you considering layoffs without the loan? Are you considering layoffs or salary reductions? Or after the loan period is up, the 8 weeks of the loan period is up, are you going to need to consider it then? And obviously you want to keep employees motivated. You want to keep them as productive and happy as possible. So you want to put as much of a positive and upbeat halo as you can about it, but it's more important to be honest with them. So if in your heart you think the situation's dire, you want to find a way to communicate that. But if you think by and large you're in good shape, hopefully, and you will get through that, then you want to communicate that, but then communicate the possibilities of what may happen. It's so important. This is, you know, we're talking a lot about external, and I'm so glad, Mary Lee, you raised this question, because as everybody on this webinar knows, the motivation of your employees is the heartbeat of your business. And so this is something that will reap long-term benefits. We've talked a lot about things that are going to happen for a while, but then go back to the norm. This is something that actually long-term can improve the overall health and morale of your company if you do it well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I was on a webinar a couple weeks ago where somebody was talking about pulse surveys with employees to really kind of keep that kind of momentum going of listening to employees. We actually, my firm created something that we can do with our employees to do that. Michael T, what's your view on this? Because you're nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, it resonates a lot. I think not too much more to add. I think your point, constant feedback, again, feedback loops. It's making yourself available and showing people that you care about their voice and their point of view. I think Michael's right. You need to provide guidance. And for us in a smaller company, though, we can also encourage people to share their voice and share their news. What do they think about what's going on? Obviously that works up to a certain point, but for us, it's great. Like, we're not experts. No one's really an expert on this. Well, there's very few experts on this. So don't present yourself as one. We don't know the future, but hearing their concerns and their voice is really important. And then I just say about, in my experience, people don't ask for help enough. They don't know the help that you can offer, or they think they don't want to be a pain or anything like that. So it's trying to find small ways that you can improve people's work environments, perhaps. So for us, we have a stipend that they're available to call upon, and to, the most simple things. I noticed one of our employees was always sat in a seemingly pretty uncomfortable position, and then I realized that his extension cord doesn't stretch far enough across his room to sit at a desk. So it's so small in the scale of things, but just showing that you care about the small things as well as the big things, I think is important.
Yeah, great. I've got another digital question that's come through on the Q&A, which I'd like to kind of ask you, Michael T, because it relates to both external and internal, I think. We hear there's been a big increase in phishing and other forms of digital marketing fraud. Are there some simple things that companies can do to protect themselves and their customers?
So I'm no security expert. For me, it's the basic stuff. I mean, I Google everything that looks suspicious, and generally speaking, someone's flagged the phishing email 1,000 times before you found it. It's not amazing advice, and I can't offer deeper security advice, but you're right. It's people are being exposed, and perhaps it's as a larger organization, you just want to have your ear to the ground about is your company name being used in these type of things. Obviously, that's always a concern, but now more than ever. And yeah, that's all I can say to that point, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's fair. Just kind of switching back to a little bit external, but it also relates to internal, and we're thinking about your company wherever you operate, but also where else you operate, whether that be in different regions, whether that be in different geographies, different countries. And different countries are facing a different set of challenges, and they're in a different place as regards to COVID-19. So when you're dealing with the communications piece, is there a need to create a local, a regional, a targeted communications campaign that differs? How do you manage that? I'll go to Michael G first on that question.
Sure. Yeah. I would say always, not just during this current crisis, but always you want to tailor your communications to the local, to the particular country or to the local market. And the way to do that is to find the local nexus that speaks to that market. So, and we've seen this crisis, Mary Lee, as you said, different countries are at different phases of this. We've seen in our country, different governors managing it differently. And so what you want to do is find that local nexus. So if you have data, let's say, to share that's relevant, it's not really helpful to see the global data on that if you are at the Miami Herald or the Times of London or something like that. What you need to do is show the specific data in that community if you want the local pickup. National gets national attention, global gets global attention, but if you want that local pickup, you need the local nexus and the local data, the local spokesperson, if possible, to support it.
Great. Michael T, anything to add to that?
In terms of tech and digital, I'd say people want to know that you're going to use their data in a valuable way. So if you're asking for location data with the mindset that you're going to provide different information or services to different regions, then then make that clear. Why are you asking for this? And make it immediate, the value of having given that information to someone as well.
Okay. We're talking a lot about external communications, and Michael G., you mentioned earlier on having emotional intelligence, being flexible, being nimble. I think emotional intelligence is really important in the current environment. I thought I turned everything off. Sorry about that. There's always one that gets through. I wonder if there's a danger, and I'm sure we've all seen examples of this, dangers of ads or promotions or campaigns not landing. They just don't feel right. They don't feel appropriate. I have one in the back of my mind right now, and I don't want to use a brand name, but it's a TV ad that I've seen, and they're trying to talk about how COVID is changing their business, but it just doesn't come across in the right way. How do you find that balance? How do you really develop something that's going to land appropriately? Michael G. first for that one.
Yeah, well, I think the strategy there is there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of short-term pressure right now for all of the reasons that all of us know about. And what you want to do is when you're communicating either on your brand or on the COVID crisis, but in a way that reflects your brand, you want to be able to look at it through a long-term lens and your long-term values and the long-term health of your company. So you don't want to do it in a way that is responding to the short term, but also with some short-term strategy that could hurt you in the long run. And so that's really the strategy. And if there's a specific question out there, I'm happy to address it. But I would say big picture, that's a strategy that I would employ in terms of how you do that.
All right, Michael T., do you want anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think sticking to your core values is hyper important, so it feels authentic. I'd also say, I've seen a lot of amazing contributions from the BAB community as well, in terms of donations to certain causes and efforts, and I would love to see more follow up. And what's the impact of that? What's the personal stories? How is that actually making a difference? And there's so many numbers being thrown around right now. Billions and trillions of dollars being discussed, that even a very substantial donation from an organization can kind of just feel like white noise. So making that land for me would be about, okay, show us the impact, tell the stories of the communities that's improving, and following through on your messaging, I think.
Does it feel wrong to promote something that is a, quote, nice to have, quote, type thing now? Or, should that just kind of go by the wayside? Is that a pleasant diversion given from everything else that's going on? Just a kind of gut reaction on that would be great. Michael Thompson first.
So I think the world's crying out for good news, and people want positivity, and if you're going to do something, of course there's a philanthropic element to that, but you also want to communicate that to your audience and to let them know that you care. And so as long as it's done sensitively, then I think it's a positive thing.
Okay, Michael G., any comments?
Yeah, I'll say one of our recruiters called me fairly early on in the crisis, and she said, thankfully we're still helping our clients hire right now. And she said she wants to post some jobs on LinkedIn, but was concerned that there would be some backlash or something like that. And I said to her, you are offering good news, which people are dying for right now, and so posting something like that will be a light in people's days. And I think people will be happy to see it. They'll be happy to help, and they'll be more captive for all of the reasons we've discussed during this webinar. And I offered to review the language for her, just because we've been working together for more than 10 years and whatever. And it was received well, thankfully, and she was happy about it. And it's helped her business.
On a very tactical level, and we're all dealing with this right now as we are working on our own or we're working with clients and we're thinking about imagery and visualizations. What are your thoughts on image use? I mean, obviously you kind of want to reflect the current situation with social distancing, and you want to show, you know, all the sort of, we're in this together with the healthcare workers and all the really great things that are happening. But is that a necessity? Do we want to steer clear of that? Is it being overused? What's your view on that? Michael G.
I think that's a really smart question. And if you can adapt your visual to reflect the reality of the world that we're living in, and it's not harmful to your long-term brand, I think that's a really smart thing to do, because it shows that your antenna is high, and that you know, you can relate to whomever your audiences are, and it will be well received and appreciated.
Okay, Michael T.
I'll defer to Michael G on that one.
Okay, I've got a very specific question on kind of operational aspect kind of communications for lots of small companies, and a lot of our audience here are from small companies. Collecting their receivables is a matter of life and death. A lot of people have been applying for the PPP, and you know, this is really important time as far as that is concerned. How direct can communications be in this part of the business? Presumably a little bit more direct than what we're doing on the marketing front, but you know, what's your view on that? And I'll start with Michael T on that one.
Yeah, I think you can be direct, but you've got to be empathetic. You know, companies are hurting, and you're better off finding something flexible that's going to have that client around in the long term than trying to, you know, drive them out of business for that latest invoice. So yeah, that would be my balance on that. You've of course got to be flexible, and if you have the ability to be flexible, then do so. But as the question presented, it's life and death for you too. So direct communication, clear, open channels, and pointing back to what we discussed before, picking up the phone and talking to people directly about these things, and not having email chains just bouncing around the place.
Yeah, Michael G, any comments to add?
Yeah, so it just depends on, you know, what your situation is. So if you are at DEF CON 1, then you should be direct. You should pick up the phone. And if you are not at DEF CON 1, if you are reasonably expecting a PPP loan, and it'll come in on time for you, then you should follow up with your clients, because they're, you know, obviously, you know, everyone's going to have some level of cash flow issue. And you just want to find out if a client is a slower payer than normal. You all know the cadence of your clients' payments. If they're a slower payer than normal, you should ask them, you know, what they think the timing of their payment is, so you can plan accordingly. And you could even follow up with them, you know, around that time. So I think it's okay to be assertive and asking them what their plans are. And but if you're at DEF CON 1, you know, but so in the first scenario where you're just being assertive and asking what their plans are, you may want to show a sign of strength as a company too. Just saying, you know, big picture, we think we'll be okay. We're doing okay. We just want to be responsible and proactive, and just want to see what your timing was, and show that strength, because I think as a rule, people respond more to strength than to weakness. But if you're at DEF CON 1, pick up the phone, start with the people you have the best relationships with, and go from there.
Yeah, I've got a couple of broad questions that I want to pose, and then we'll get more back into the audience questions. You know, over the last sort of, I'd say 5-6 years, there's been an increasing trend towards organizations having an organizational purpose. It's not just about making money, it's about doing something beyond just making money. And there's all sorts of ways you can define purpose. And I've seen examples of brands and companies that are doing very well in terms of underlining and underscoring their purpose in the current environment. And I've seen examples of companies that didn't really have a purpose start kind of obviously adopting a purpose. What's your view on sort of going forward? What will this do to the whole purpose conversation? And I'll start with Michael G. first.
Yeah, I think, as you said, Mary Lee, a lot of people are finding conscience that they hadn't found before, and I mean that in a positive way, for sure. And I think that is also, we've talked about some things will stay and return to the and not return to the norm, and some things will change. And I would put this in the category of things that are more likely to change. Meaning, I think companies that see the light, that find the light, will continue to do so because they will see it as a value not only to what they're doing bigger picture, but they will see it as a value to themselves. And as a rule, companies should look at philanthropic or related efforts as ones that are reasonably related to the work that they do. So if you're a food company of some kind, maybe you get involved with some kind of food bank, is just using one kind of example. So, but I think that, I'm sure you've been a part of and seen some of the points that they're, as terrible and tragic as this whole situation has been, there are silver linings. I would say that's one of the silver linings.
Yeah. Michael T., anything to add?
No, I think all great points. Again, it's just authenticity. It's being related to what you do. As you say, it's genuine. You're having a genuine impact. It's not just lip service to social responsibility, and doing good is good for business. So I think companies that have, as Mike says, have dipped their toe into it now, they're probably going to see the impact of that, and why would they change?
Okay, I'm going to move over to one of the questions we have in, but I'm also going to encourage everybody else who's listening in, if you've got questions, please send them into the Q&A section so that we can table them with our participants. This question is from Duncan Edwards, who is the CEO of British American Business. It's a very good question. I think we all kind of are curious about this. He says, I'm curious about how optimistic the panel, including Brand Pie, is about the prospects for marketing services business post-crisis. Do you think clients will be quick to come back into the market? So I'll start with Michael T. first.
I, like Michael, tend to be more of an optimist than a pessimist. I think, however, I think companies absolutely should reinvest and double down their efforts and their core products, as I mentioned before. It's not a time to be, if you have, unless you're at DEFCON 1, you shouldn't be pulling everything back. And, these good communication, good marketing drives revenue. It would be foolish to take a step back from that and not consider it a revenue generating tool. It's not a cost. It should be a revenue generating tool.
Michael G.
Yeah, I think all kinds of marketing, creative, professional services agencies will be strong. I think all industries will be strong, and I am an optimist that things will come back and come back faster than people will expect. The issue with this crisis, and other crises, frankly, too, but it's not just an economic crisis; it's economic and health, both. And there's a lot of uncertainty on both. When we're in a recession or of any kind, even the last recession, there is a lot of anxiety around the economy, but this one is multiplied because of the health. So there's more uncertainty. So whatever the pattern is, it'll be a little longer, going through it, and the longer we go through it, the longer it will take to come back. With that said, there is an enormous amount, and I will say to all the consumer brands on this webinar, there is an enormous amount of pent-up demand, enormous amount. And I'm sure you feel that in your own lives, the things you can't wait to do again. And so that pent-up demand, I think, will be explosive, and I think will benefit the economy in a way that people are not predicting sufficiently.
And since you asked for Brown Pie's perspective, I would also add that I'm an optimist, generally speaking. And I agree about the pent-up demand for consumers. And I think on the B2B side, most businesses are realizing that they can't just stop doing what they're doing. They need to somehow keep the momentum going. And what we're seeing is that while people may be pulling back a bit, or they may be redirecting resources to certain things that are more critical at this point in time, that there's an understanding that it has to get back to business as usual. So I do think that things will come back. How quickly they come back, I think, is probably more the question, because we don't even know how quickly we're going to be able to walk the streets again in a normal way. So I guess that would be my take on it. I'm very pleased to say we haven't really seen a downturn in business. I don't know about you guys, Michael T and Michael G, really substantial downturn. So I'm pretty buoyant in my thinking about this.
Yeah, same. Thankfully, our clients, our existing clients have all been strong. I'm thankful for that. I'm grateful. I don't, it's a credit to our team. Our team has been working harder than when we were all at the office. They work hard to begin with.
Yeah.
And they're working harder now. And everyone's very focused and creative. And but I'm grateful for it, and I don't take it for granted. And I'm hoping it'll stay, because there is so much uncertainty, and we don't know how long this is going to last, and we don't know how it's going to affect us. But I've said to my team, you know, whatever happens, we'll be back. We'll be in strong growth mode again. It's just a matter of when it starts again, but we will be there. And but so far, everything is good, thankfully.
I would echo that people are working harder. But I would also like to echo something that Michael G was talking about earlier in terms of the internal communications piece being so absolutely important. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the marketing services space when we come out of this, because typically people revolve quickly from job to job in marketing services. And I think that if they've stayed with a firm through this, and the firm has gotten them through this, they're more likely to have a bit more loyalty than they would have normally done in normal circumstances. So I think that'll be another interesting trend to watch as we come out of this. Michael,
you know, I'll say just Mary Lee, if I can, I know a couple of our employees have said to me, like, they've seen some of their former colleagues get laid off, you know, and we've made a commitment to keep our employees, keep them at their salary levels. Mm-hmm. So I think, to your point, people are seeing their friends or former colleagues not in as healthful circumstance, and that's they're feeling it. They're feeling it.
Michael T, anything to add?
I think we're quite lucky. Obviously, digital products and digitization of processes is something that maybe makes more sense now than it did before. I think it doesn't mean that companies aren't changing their strategies or adapting their strategies, but as you mentioned, Mary Lee, companies understand they need to keep momentum going, and you can't sit around twiddling your thumbs, because we don't know when this is, you know, when is the new normal? We don't know. So that, yeah, I'd say we're lucky, but not complacent.
Okay, I've got a question here about digital. Can you give guidance on how to better optimize your digital spaces during this time, especially for organizations that haven't traditionally operated in those spaces?
Optimize digital spaces.
I'm guessing that means website, digital presence, digital assets.
Okay, so I think we touched on various points on this throughout the conversation, but and one aspect of maybe there can be a lot of communication. Is there too much communication? That's the question. Leveraging your digital platforms to deliver messaging and information to consumers when they need it, so they're already engaged. They're already, you know, this isn't something that's entering their inbox or out of the blue. It's part of their experience of using your service. I think that makes a lot of sense. As we touched upon earlier, localizing your digital services. So not every geographic location is going to need the same digital services necessarily. So thinking about how you can specialize per region, or I think that's another way to think about things. And then, as I touched upon earlier, it's using this as an opportunity to focus on your core. So serverless, so that's a new technology in terms of the back-end systems that technologies are using, leveraging people like AWS and Microsoft. So that technology is coming on leaps and bounds. So that would be an example of something I'd say to look at now. It strengthens your core product and makes you more stable for now, but in the long run, it has all sorts of advantages as well. So perhaps thinking about what do we have the time and space to think about now that we didn't necessarily before, by us focusing on those core products.
Okay, I've got a great question here. I'm not sure how I would answer this, so I'll lob it to you guys. If my organization doesn't have something substantive or credible to say right now, how do I remain relevant to my core audiences without forcing a message that will not resonate?
So a couple things that come to mind are, so if you truly have not, first of all, do your best to think of something that you think is the closest to the current situation we're going through. But if there's nothing, a couple other types of ideas that may work is, if one of your employees is doing something to help with the crisis on a volunteer basis, or if you're doing something unique in terms of, it has to be, and I want to underscore unique, in terms of internal communications or employee morale during this period. Those are the kinds of things you want to think through. But if there's truly nothing, then you want to double down on your planning efforts. And because it's going to change. I promise it's going to change. And it'll start to get better as the country starts to open up. It'll start to get better. So, it'll change, but just double down on your planning. We have one new client that we've said to them, let's focus our time just on planning and messaging, and then be ready to go out of the gate as soon as all of our collective antennas feel like it's time.
Good idea. Good idea. So I'm going to take one last question here. There's a lot of pent-up demand, but how is the marketing landscape going to change? So, for example, in-person events won't die, but it's going to look a lot different. What do you think it will look like? Either one of you. Michael T.
I mentioned earlier, I've actually been pleasantly surprised by virtual conferences. I was really skeptical to begin with, but I found them to be highly effective. And actually, don't spend time traveling. You don't spend time, speaking to people who maybe you shouldn't be speaking to. It's hyper efficient, really interesting. And so they may not die completely, but I can certainly see a trend where there's more readily accepted virtual conferences, and that's more of the norm.
Oh, Michael G, anything to add?
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think that piece is one of the things I put in the category of largely eventually going back to the norm. But right, there might be some, as Michael said, more virtual conferences or some kind of hybrid, depending on the audience.
Great. Okay, that exhausts the questions we've had from everybody. I would just like to give a big thank you to Michael T and Michael G for being so candid with us, and their answers has been great. I've enjoyed the session today. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I have. So thank you so much. Tamara, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Mary Lee.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary Lee. Thanks to you, and I'll echo your thanks to Michael ×2. Really, really interesting session. For any of you who have colleagues who couldn't join us, it has been recorded, and we're happy to share that. And please remember to join us for our third and final in this series on April 28th at 11 a.m. on internal employee engagement. Thanks, everyone.